Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lamont Weber, and today I can only call this program and the extraordinary guest that we're greeting today, Judith Very Baker, a living miracle. In my humble opinion, I stand in awe in your presence. Uh, we're so privileged to have Judith Very Baker, the author of Me and Lee: How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald. Welcome, Judith.
How do you do? Happy to be here.
Um, I must say that uh, I, I want to acknowledge you as an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary scientific mind, a brave and courageous individual,
Well,
and
it's nice to hear that since my family has other opinions sometimes.
that and someone who has really come forth to tell the story of heroism and patriotism uh, of yourself, of Lee Harvey Oswald, a man who was vilified and by certain powers that think they be. Uh, we'll we'll get into that. Who was framed as the patsy for the John F. Kennedy assassination when,
The
as we shall
perfidious way.
learn, he was trying everything he could to prevent it. And uh, I'm so glad to have intersected at this point, and now you have brought out a magnificent book for the historical record, Me and Lee: How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald. You told me, and I believe you, that once you pick up this book, you cannot put it down. It is just amazing, and and um, uh, and now you are bringing together leading experts and researchers in a landmark conference, actually the fourth such conference. Um, I am so happy to be here. In 1976, I received a phone call in New York from Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez,
Okay.
chairman of the House Banking Committee, who invited me down to Washington and asked me to help to assist him in getting the House Select Committee on Assassination started to investigate the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. Because at that point, I had started a citizens' effort to investigate the assassination
Well,
of
thank you.
John F. Kennedy, and had been traveling the the country speaking to people, to researchers all in the West Coast, the East Coast, in Texas, all over. And out of that, we were able to work with uh, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Black Caucus, and we got the House Select Committee on Assassination started. It was immediately infiltrated by the CIA and kind of blooped along, but at least we kept the
Well,
flame going.
congratulations.
Yeah,
You're
we
on the right track.
yeah. Now, however, you have kept, and what's blowing my mind as I'm reading this, and we're shortly going to get into it, is how did you manage to keep number one alive, and number two off the public radar and away from subpoenas all
Well,
these years?
I have a 160 IQ, and it helped a little.
I see.
No, but
It was,
actually,
I
a
don't
lot of it has to
understand
do with
that one.
just the fact that being a woman, they think you don't. You can sit there and they'll think you don't know anything. Think about it from there. I was also a Mormon for a considerable number of years to protect who I was, and because I wanted to serve God, serve man, and I was able to do that as Sister Baker. I mean, there are how many Sister Bakers around? They never mention your first name. So in many ways, and of course, the Garrison investigation, we were in Mexico. My former husband was in geology by then, and I didn't even know about the Garrison investigation until it was too late. So by then I had a baby, and I wasn't going to have that baby hurt.
Oh, well.
It's wonderful to
Uh,
talk to someone who understands, though, how difficult this was.
oh,
So I
it
appreciate it.
was. I just want to get my one anecdote out, and that was that. Oh, no, no, we'll wait. Please, let's. This is so dense that I'm going to ask you to be the guide through this story, which is so dense that I would not know where to begin. And I'm sure that you, who have told it masterfully in this book, can now lead our audience through this. So please start where you will, because it is so.
I'll tell you where I'd like
Yeah.
to start, sir, because you know so much. I'd like to start with you asking some of the questions that have always concerned you that may have confused you about Lee Oswald.
Well,
Just try
here
it. See, I
is.
don't need any notes.
Yeah,
It's all in my
yeah, yeah,
memory.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, here is one burning question that I have,
Oh,
which, as a student of synchronicity and Jung, okay, do you think that the meeting of you and Lee Harvey Oswald to pick up your mail on that fateful day was providential? Was it orchestrated by Lee as a super undercover triple agent who somehow had been pre-informed that you were picking up your mail there and said, "Well, this is the best way to get to to
yeah.
infiltrate her life"?
All of the above.
This is so dense. Well, uh, uh, you obviously are a gifted scientist, and this whole thing began by your being a a a precocious scientist who was taken under the wing of.
Dr. Oxner and Dr. Moore,
Yeah,
also Dr. Deal, and of
leading
course some Nobel Prize winners as well.
yeah, leading scientists while you were in high school, and also Senator Smathers of Florida.
Smathers.
And they were kind of grooming you along to be this tremendous cancer researcher. So maybe take us back to your high school, and you had all these leading lights kind of grooming you along,
All
and
right.
take us right into there.
Okay. Well, first, my grandmother died of cancer, and I had cancer running through my family. So I captured some wild mice and began there experimenting with them. I tried to find cancer in the wild mouse population. That actually, it's humanity that has the most cancer, as you find out, not in the wild mouse population. But anyway, from that point, I started reading, and I managed to get into the medical libraries and things at my high school. I had a wonderful high school in that we had a lot of retired military officers. For example, my physics and science seminar instructor was Colonel Philip Doyle, and he was an excellent in physics and math and so on. And we had Mr. Scherer, who was a chemical engineer, and that's unusual. I mean, he was teaching chemistry. And so what did I do? By the time I was 16, I invented a new way to get magnesium out of seawater that avoided using platinum. And it was actually getting a German type of operation, making it more viable and useful, And Dow Chemical Company jumped right on it. Well, also everybody was around me. I brought my cancer stuff with me to the International Science Fair. By the way, I met Werner von Braun and all those people, and it was a wonderful experience. But what I really learned is that they were kind of awed by us because right across from me was Robert Strom. Robert Strom and I were playing chess there, and Robert had won the $64,000 question, you know.
Wow.
So this is the kind of people we have that were out there at that time. And yes, the CIA was there. You can imagine. Of course they were. So I get all these connections, like with Walter Reed Institute, for research, and to Oak Ridge, and I had access to radiation from two doctors who were trained by Oak Ridge and under the auspices. I have the records of the CIA. So right from the beginning, CIA is watching all the things we're doing. By the end of my research, by the time I'm 18, I have given mice cancer in only 7 days. And I had never done that anywhere, and I did it in a dirt floor lab under the stadium of my school. But they had everything there. You understand that we had the mice in one area, and we had a nice lab built in under the other on a concrete slab, but with all the necessary components. But they were frightened because when I started giving mice cancer, they brought in black lights, so they'd be trying to sterilize the lab where I was working there. They finally moved me to the stadium because it became frightened. Because these mice were, dragging around huge tumors and things like that in a matter of days. When I realized what I had, nobody could really help me to understand I couldn't get my hands on an electron microscope, for example. I crashed the fourth Science Writer Seminar. I just went on the internet and crashed into it. That's where all these famous scientists were meeting. And there are all these suits, and everything. And I came in between two reporters. They were holding their media passes, and I put my high school newspaper pass out there real fast between them. They were closing the doors and let me in. Well, then the police noticed me, and to make a long story short, they were going to evict me. After all, everybody else is a man in a black suit, okay, or they're wearing their white medical garb, and here I am, 5'2", and I look like a cheerleader. Really, I had a good figure, and what am I doing there? So, well, I had a stack though of all my materials, and I said I need someone to look at this. And up there on the stage was Dr. Robert Robinson. He was a Nobel Prize winner, and next to him was Dr. Harold Urey. And next to him was Dr. Howard Deal. Who was he? He was the head of the research for all of the American Cancer Society. Next to him was Dr. George Moore, head of the Roswell Cancer Institute, which created, and I helped in this, he will create in just a few years the RPMI 1640 formula that grows cancer faster than anything else. And I even helped and assisted in that particular part of that project. In short, by the time I went to New Orleans, I'd been asked, it was in oath papers and everything, I've been asked to do research on making cancer more deadly. And you may wonder why you would do that. Well, the argument they gave me is that if you can make cancer more deadly, you can figure out how to kill it. But actually, I now know that they were thinking about creating biological weapons with cancer, because we had the problem, for example, of Fidel Castro. 6 months before I arrived in New Orleans, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that time, everybody was terrified about World War III. Many attempts had been made to kill Castro, and all of them would lead back to the perpetrators. However, if somebody dies of cancer because they smoked too many cigars, that's a different story. So, did I care about this? I lived in Florida. My friends were, as I found out that you knew, Tony Lopez Fresquet, or his father or family. And I'd like to ask you to bring up a little bit of that before we go further.
Yeah. Now his father had been the
finance minister.
Yeah, had been the treasury minister of the Castro government until Castro turned against him, as he did his kind of first kind of
cabinet
wave of cabinet ministers. He purged the first civilian president of Cuba. He purged many of the his.
But Rufo was the last to leave. He was there longer than almost anyone else in the first cabinet. But he had to send his son, who had an American wife. His two sons, Tony and Tony's brother, Vince, came to my high school and began and he was very good in science, and he was very cute. So I mean, I wasn't just looking at mice, but I was a good girl. I wanted to become a nun because I thought I couldn't have children. And lo and behold, that turned out not to be the case. I was as fertile as could be, and no problem. But that did change things. This is the time of the sexual revolution, and I was angry at my parents because they literally kidnapped me out of becoming a nun, as you read in the book.
Right.
And all of a sudden, and I'm locked up. And Senator Smathers did hear about that, got me a special scholarship in the middle of the school year, actually, because we're talking about February. And I'm put back in business, and I have a scholarship. I'm working very hard, and I'm continuing a lot of research. And at that time, I actually invented a new way to detect cancer in the bloodstream. They actually wouldn't use and implement the same kind of detection system for about 40 years. Unfortunately, as you know, I was removed from cancer research because of my objections to using prisoners. Of course, that's further in the story. But the fact is that after we had completed our work, the material had to be tested, and they were willing to test this on what I thought were terminally ill patients. They were getting them supposedly from Angola prison, and they weren't ill at all. They were normal, and they were the size, shape, and physiognomy of Castro,
Right.
So I objected to that, and I was ejected from the whole system, and thank God I was able to get out, and it saved my life because they sent me back to Florida. But before that happened, Lee and I fell in love. Lee was really a protector of this system. He was trying to find, after all, Castro knew there were efforts being made to try to kill him. He knew that a lot of stuff was going on in New Orleans. He knew that paramilitary, the brigades and all kinds of things that were in training there, they still were in 1963. And of course, he sent in his spies whenever he could, because the borders should have been protected more, sort of like today. So you had Cubans just pouring into the port of New Orleans there. Most of them were coming in, as you know, through Mexico, Texas, and they were coming in on Greyhound and the other buses. And it was easy to locate. This is what they did. They would they had helpers there to pick the suitcases up that were being brought in when the Cubans were coming in there by bus in New Orleans. And if the suitcases were light, they were under suspicion. Now, why would you think that would be?
Yeah, well, I just finished reading why, so.
No, why?
So you tell us.
All right. Well, what they found out is if somebody's coming as a refugee, usually they're packing every precious object they have. But if they intend to go back, their suitcases probably are not full because they want to bring back car parts and all kinds of things like that they can make money on. At the very least, they're going to bring back all kinds of American things that they couldn't get because of the blockade. So that was an easy way to figure out who might be coming back. If their suitcases were light, right away they were under suspicion. Little things like that. So there was a great effort there being made in New Orleans to find out who these spies were. And what they would do, at least in one case, I know that Lee had uncovered one of these spies. They photographed him going up to the FPCC fake office that Lee had provided just for 1 month at one point.
Right.
And at that time, arrested him, planted drugs on him, beat him up, and sent him back to Cuba as a drug dealer when he was no such thing. So, they would do dirty tricks like that.
Right.
And it was a very active time, and I learned about a whole different kind of world because of that.
Right. Now, so that you really were because you seem to have had a life sort of at a victim of abusive men, starting with your father at a certain point. And so you were trying to escape from your father and pursue
and the man was brilliant,
the jobs. Sorry?
This was a brilliant man who was drinking too much finally, and he'd wanted to be a rocket scientist. And what happened to him? He ended up retiring to Florida on his inventions and everything, and drinking and ruined because my mother wouldn't let him, lock us all up at Sandia up there at Albuquerque and work on the Redstone rocket project and all that kind of thing. But before that, my father had also taught me a lot, though, about the rigors of intuition, if you want to call it that.
Right.
and how we worked very hard. Like I built my first TV set when I was 8 years old. I also tried to convince my father that I was an alien because they were kind of superstitious, and he was abusive. My parents were abusive. And so I was trying to figure out ways to make them think that I had extrasensory perception and things like that, so they wouldn't hit me, basically. And for example, I'll give you one example. My father was calling CQ. He was doing a lot of things with his radio. He had his own radio station and TV station. He also had a ham radio operating station with a big tower, and he could hear stuff from all over the place. Well, every Saturday they would listen to the horse races with his friends, and they were betting. And I was making money, and they couldn't figure out how I was doing it. And finally, they're saying, "How do you do this?" And I said, "Well, you know what it is. I'm not really from this planet. I'm an alien." All this kind of thing. And of course, that sounds ridiculous, but I was trying to find ways. What I would do is I went to my father's ham radio shack, and I found out that the results were delayed about 10 minutes. Because they had to go through one station to another station to reach finally Chicago, and then it would be broadcast on WSBTC in South Bend.
I see.
And so I'd say, look, I want to bet $10 on High Gun. That was the first time I did that. Who's High Gun? Well, look, he's 20-1. Oh yeah, we'll take your money, Judy. And of course I won. Well, how did she do? Then I did that so much until I was afraid they'd catch on, so I had to quit. But it was fun growing up and being among people who were technologically savvy and so on. And then it was sad to watch my father decline and become a rather brutal man, as he drank. And they,
But
science was the way I could escape all that.
Yeah, and so you had been offered a job in New Orleans under Dr. Osler, correct?
Yes, but in Mary Sherman, Dr. Mary Sherman's laboratory.
Yeah.
She was the only female, and she was well known. I mean, I was so honored and to have that chance. And here I am at the post office. I want to become married to this very high IQ, 186 IQ genius who I've often said, and other places they've heard me say it, the silences that he had that I thought were fraught with depth and meaning and emotion was actually emptiness. Well, I was fooled. So his succinct statements were due mainly to the fact that he didn't like to talk much, not that he was really thinking all that hard about humanity. What he was really thinking about was mathematics. And as he once told me, I said, you don't take me anywhere, no horseback riding, you used to play guitar. We discussed philosophy, we talked about string theory, we talked about the universe, and now you don't. And he said, I've got you. Now I've got to go on to my next project.
I see. Yeah.
So,
And so you then
I'm going to marry this man, not realizing this, and he's going to come to New Orleans.
Right.
And he said, "Oh, I love you. I'm going to write to you every day." He said, "I love you" only once. I grabbed onto that because he was a man of few words. And also, I could get along with someone like Lee Oswald, who was also supposedly a man of few words. But believe me, he had plenty to say when it came to "I love you." He was a very affectionate and precious person.
Right. And so this was in April of 1963. Yes. And you arrived in New Orleans.
I think the wining and dining is going to happen. I'm going to have steak dinner. They're going to say, "Well, there you are, wonderful Judy. You're going to help us." Nobody was there. Nobody even knew I was coming. I came 2 weeks early. Didn't want to go home. And it's because of the semester and trimester system. Our school got out 2 weeks early. Actually, a little more than that. I'm in New Orleans and I have almost nothing. And what am I going to do? Instead of, I go to the YWCA where I was supposed to check in, and they say, "Who are you?" I go, I'm the one with all my name in the paper, and everybody loves me, and they want me to work with them, and I'm going to do wonderful things, and aren't I on the list anywhere? I have no idea who you are. All right, what are you going to do? Well, what I, of course, had to do is move in with these, in the cheapest room they had, which already had 4 girls in it. And as I've said many times, 2 of them were strippers. One was a Playboy bunny, going to Playboy bunny school, and the other was a coarse waitress. And they immediately wanted to show me the town, show me the real New Orleans, to say, honey, you don't know anything. Wait till you see the real world. Oh my goodness, what they showed me. But anyway, there you are. All of a sudden I'm seeing a whole different kind of world. And something has to be done. I am an asset, and I've come early, but they don't want me to go and get taken off by some sailor somewhere, And you see, and it is. I now realize, didn't at first. Lee Oswald was sent there to intercept anything that might happen to me, and I'm so grateful he was there because the things did happen, as you can read in the book. Not the least of being kicked out of an apartment place where I thought was an apartment house, which actually turned out to be a bordello. And the police took everybody else at least they took them away. And I was thrown into the streets with nowhere to go in the middle of the night. And the only one I knew how to turn to at that time was Lee Oswald. My doctors were still out of town. And that's the only phone number I had because, as you know, my former husband finally did come to marry me. But he knew that if he told me that he would marry me and then be gone the next day and would probably be gone all summer, that I wouldn't marry him. So he wouldn't tell me where he was going. And he was gone in one day after that. And I was most basically abandoned most of the summer and felt it deeply and felt unloved. And here's Lee Oswald. He had married a Soviet. He's not with her now. They were not getting along at all. He got her pregnant a second time so she'd have a child in the United States so they wouldn't deport her, so he could get a divorce from her. That's the situation. I feel unloved and unappreciated by a man who took off after we got married. He was gone, 3 weeks the first time. And that man just was there for me in so many ways. Much more intelligent than they say. Remember, they say he had an IQ of 118, which is not bad. That's without looking at the fact that he had dyslexia. Now they have special tests for people who sees like the number 6 upside down as a 9 and so on. If he had the adjusted test for him, his IQ would be in the 140 range. It's completely compatible with mine. And his ability to speak almost completely fluent Russian and his ability to memorize was extraordinary. But above all is his ability to observe. He was a wonderful spy. He really was. And he observed plenty with me. Maybe I shouldn't say it like that. I'm happy to have someone to talk to who has been back there at that era, understands how naive we were, how we trusted our government, how I thought these great authorities who brought me in, I hero worshiped them. And everything, actually, I was brought in to be used, just to be used.
Yeah, well, you give us a daily, an inside story of being day after day at the parties and then at the working days and the inside.
I see it all. I see everything in pictures, I remember every detail.
Yeah. And how is it, and when is it that Lee comes to you and says, I'm now involved in a plot to kill the president?
Well, it's actually extraordinary. Of course, we don't have enough time to say everything, but basically I'm at the post office and I can only write one letter. We're eloping. His parents hate Catholics. My parents are Catholic. He wants to get married. Obviously, we were sexually interested in each other. And at this time, this is when we had the great sexual revolution. You can't get birth control pills unless you're married. Now, that's how the depth of my love was. It wasn't all that great. It was hormones and pheromones and sex. And here I was going to be a nun, and all this different world opened up. And he was so intelligent. So here I want him to come, but I didn't want to tell him that I was going to stay. He had one more semester at University of Florida. He was going to switch into geology. So I said, I have to go to, I didn't say how long I was going to stay, but I said, I can't come back to the University of Florida. I'm going to New Orleans this summer. And I said, if you care about me, you'll come. He said, well, I will. He says, now I'll marry you. He never asked me. I had to buy my own wedding ring and everything. Anyway, here I am at the post office. I'm only allowed to send one letter. This is very important because you understand more than most about espionage and so on. Imagine if you have a young woman and very young, but she's handing over a certain letter, and you have an eagle-eye spy standing behind you. There's Lee standing there in the post office. Well, sure, they knew where I was going. Every day I went to the post office to see if a letter was coming from my fiance, which it wasn't. So I was angry now. I looked behind me, glanced behind me, and I noticed he did. Hey, hold up your hand. You've been married, haven't you? You've been married.
I am married.
All right, hold up your hand. Do you have a ring on your finger?
Yeah, I've got it right here.
Let's show it up. What hand is that on?
It's on the left hand.
Right, that's what it is in America and so on, right? I look at his left hand, there's no ring. Well, he'd been married in Russia. His wedding ring was on his right hand. I didn't notice that at first, you see. So I thought I could flirt with him. After all, I'm not married yet, and I'm angry because no letter has come. Now, as for him, his eagle eye, and he could see newspaper headline from across the street. I mean, he could read. His eyes were extraordinarily good. His hearing, not so good. He had heard, he'd wanted to go into the Air Force originally. He joined the Civil Air Patrol and so on. But when he would sing, sometimes he'd put his hand over his left ear because the sound wasn't good. We loved to sing together. He was great, had a nice voice. I used to sing on TV because my father had a TV station and all that. And so he would put his hand sometimes over his ear and sing like that so that his voice would come out, the way he wanted to hear it. Here's this young man standing behind me. He's 23. I'm 19. We're so young. I'm handing a letter over, and of course he's going to look at it. Now I know he was sent to protect me and keep, make sure nothing would happen. And on the letter, it says in the corner, R. Rourke. Now that R, the way I wrote it, let's see, can you see it? Like that looked like an A, cursive, like A. Rourke. Lee knew an Alexander Rourke, who was with the CIA, who was at that time was at Eglin Air Force Base. Now this letter was being sent to Eglin Air Force Base because my fiance's parents were building housing there for I guess it was for the Air Force at that time. So they were living there and having their mail sent there at Eglin Air Force Base. So this, it says, it's from R. Rourke, it looks like, to him. Raleigh Rourke was the name of my fiance's friend. He said, don't put your name on it, put his. He hardly ever writes. And don't put perfume on the letter, whatever you do. You think my friend is a homosexual, So it's really funny that way. So here it says, the R. Rourke, it looks to Lee Oswald like an A. Rourke. And he knew Alexander Rourke, whose friend Jeffrey Sullivan was flying planes with CIA. And Rourke himself had his own plane, had recently also been in New Orleans. He had given lectures, anti-Castro lectures. So there you go. So he sees this R. Rourke, which he thinks is an A. Rourke. And, so it looks like I'm mailing something for Rourke. See? And what does he see down here? He sees it's being sent to R.A. Baker at Eglin Air Force Base. Well, the name of my fiance was Robert A. Baker. Well, there was an R.A. Baker that Lee Oswald knew at Eglin Air Force Base, who was an FBI agent. So now he thinks he's seeing a letter that I am mailing from Rourke to an FBI agent at Eglin Air Force Base. So that's how it started, that he thought I was into things deeper than I was. When we started talking about, like about Tony Lopez Frisquet, and I'm talking about all the anti-Castro friends I have, he thinks, you're inside deep on that too. And then when I mentioned, because we're walking along, but of course, how did we start walking along? I had a newspaper. I had put an ad in the paper because Robert did not want me to call long distance. It would show up on their records. Who's this call from New Orleans calling you, So I put a little ad in the paper. It said Jaryo, Jaryo. Well, that meant J-A for Judith Ann, and Yo was I am. So I am Judith Ann. That was the code, see? But Jaryo was a code name that Lee had seen used in the Philippines by the CIA. Here's this thing in the paper. It says Jaryo. And by the way, try and find that Jaryo code. It's really hard to find. So it could have been made up just for him or something. Jaryo, it says pretty hair, right, and so on. And it's circled, and I've kissed it with lipstick. So I was carrying that around because his eyes saw this, and I'm looking at it, and his eyes may have looked at it the same minute. It's just the crazy love thing. You think that your fiancé has been reading this, and so I was carrying it around for a couple of days. dropped it when I put the letter over to, it was under my arm. Down it went. Now, remember, I had been trained, and I was even trained to read Russian literature, and especially any kind of monographs or anything that we come across in cancer research. It was in Russian. I knew some spoken Russian. Because I have to speak it so much as read it. When I dropped it, I thought, well, he picked it up. He's such a nice looking guy. There's no ring on his finger. And Robert hasn't written, So I'm saying, I'm not married yet. And so I said, Karasha, Tavarish, like that. That is well done, comrade, in Russian. And I thought he would do like others did and say, what did you just say? What is that? Then I said, well, that's the forbidden language, that's the language you're not supposed to speak in America. But I know Russian. I was, it's a nice way to break conversation. I said, I just wanted to say something nice to you in Russian just to see what you might answer. I didn't get that far. When I said, well done, comrade, he says to me back in Russian, he says, it's not wise to speak Russian in New Orleans. Wow. Now, how are you going to talk about synchronicity, how are you going to have two people meet in New Orleans? They both can speak Russian? Come on. And he thinks all this is going on with this letter. But more than that, I had just before that, I had shown a tiny little, it's just a little check stub from Royal Castle, because when I said I was looking for letters for Mr. Rourke, because that's what Robert was going to write to me maybe, as Rourke, sending him to Mr. Rourke, you see. That would be me. And he said, the postman said, I can't give anything from Mr. Rourke unless you show me some ID, pick up his mail. This is general delivery. Well, I was looking through it, and I said, well, look here, this shows my ID. This is my check stub, from Royal Castle. And Lee, with his eagle eyes, he can see that Royal Castle. This is the main Royal Castle. It's 45 minutes away. It's not in New Orleans. It's out in Kenner, right next to Carlos Marcello's Town and Country Hotel, or motel out there, where his headquarters are. Bobby Kennedy is watching Carlos Marcello. He has a surveillance team out there at that Royal Castle. Now, it doesn't take long for Lee to think that I am involved with his side, the secret side of things, instead of the other side. First of all, I'm walking with Lee. He said, I'll walk you back to the Y. And walking along, and I noticed what good manners he had. Like, I brushed against his arm, he pulled back a little. Like, I thought, how sweet, because by then he told me he was married and all that. And he was not like the guys I had been meeting for the last few days in New Orleans, who were vomiting and trying to make hits on me, and oh, girlie, I love you, and all that, and they're drunk, all that going on. I tried to have a normal life. Well, here's Lee walking along, and he's telling me, I said, look, you're speaking Russian. He tells me, I've been in the USSR. I was in Minsk, and I was there for 30 months, and then I had to come back. And I said, oh, wow. Remember, you've read the book. You know about the spy Mickelson. I had known a spy briefly, but long enough that I understood that your family doesn't love you. There are things you can't tell them. He suffered a lot. There's a spy that I met who had been working in the underground against Hitler, and yet they all thought he was for Hitler. And here is Lee Oswald in the living flesh. He was walking around a free man after having spent 30 months as a defector in the USSR. I knew I was looking at a hero. I knew he was a brave man. I was blown away, as you can imagine. And as for him, we just hit it off right away. So here we go. So he's going to say, he has said, I wish I could talk all day to you, but I've got to go get a shirt. I've got to go to an interview. So we parted. But he'd seen the Royal Castle slip, and that's important, because the next morning, I'm on a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now get this, think about it as a spy looking at this, somebody who's trying to find out who Castro's spies are, and he's alert, and he's been asked to watch over me, apparently. They only give you just enough information, Now, they don't give you everything. There was a lot he didn't know about me, but he knew this. For some reason, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was getting on a bus and going 45 minutes out of town to work at this Royal Castle for 2 hours. Then I would be coming back. Now, that doesn't seem to make sense. Well, I only needed to work 2 hours to pay for my bill at the YWCA, and I wasn't going to be staying. So they needed somebody for the morning rush, and that's why I was doing that, just enough to make money to pay part of my bill at the Y until the doctors came back and I would be rescued. But for him, I'm going out there every morning, right when the shift is going on with Bobby Kennedy's surveillance team. And as far as he knows, I'm probably picking up things and taking them back. See, I'm like a courier. Why would I just be there for 2 hours? He's got all this stuff going through his head. Carlos Marcello, Bobby Kennedy. Lee Oswald has been working for Bobby Kennedy through Guy Bannister's office at this time.
I see.
And here and I dropped this name. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be working with Dr. Mary Sherman. Sure, I dropped names because I didn't know this man from Adam when I first met him. So, of course, I told him fancy names so he'd know I had connections. I wasn't alone and vulnerable, you see. So then he says, well, I know a man who works with Dr. Sherman in a cancer project. And I said, well, I'm going to be working on a cancer project with Dr. Sherman. He says, then you have to meet him. And he knows her. And his name is Dr. David Ferry. Well, that's how it all happened. He thought I was David Ferry, who was having trouble with Eastern Airlines, was going so often to Miami he wasn't able to do all the work that they had planned for him to do in this ring of experiments where they broke the ring with Dave. And they had all these doctors. He asked for a helper. But because he was homosexual, they thought the young helper was not a boy. They probably sent the girl, see, instead. So I couldn't seduce her. So he thinks, well, yes, this makes sense. They sent a girl. By the time the doctors came back, it was too late. I knew everything, and I realized that the project I was working on was to weaponize cancer in an attempt to kill Castro. And the whole idea behind the thing, they realized if they could divert what we might call murder incorporated going on in the Caribbean, to divert it, to take over Cuba and so on, that Kennedy's enemies in the CIA and also many others, like the mafia and so on, they would be interested in Cuba, and Kennedy would be safer, much safer. So right from the beginning, I was really basically informed about all that. I mean, within weeks, I understood what was going on. That project started on March 23rd, 1962, when they brought in really big guns to try to work on this project to kill Castro. It was one of many projects. By the way, when I first spoke out in 1999, they said, oh, there weren't any such things going on in 63. Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, we know differently now. A lot of the material I brought out in 1999, like saying that Lee Oswald told me about 3 weeks before Kennedy was killed, before the present time. I mean, 2 days later, Kennedy would be dead. He said, I believe I saved his life about 3 weeks ago. And I reported that, and people say things like, oh, come on now, maybe he was a patsy and he didn't really know what was going on. Please don't say that he tried to save Kennedy's life. That nobody's going to believe you. They do now. We've got so many more witnesses as to who he was and his courage and his loyalty. I recently have been telling people, because apparently they didn't know, that when Lee Oswald learned that little Patrick Kennedy died, that's the baby son of Jackie and President Kennedy, that when that baby died, Marina, Lee's wife, was there. When he saw the news, he broke down. Lee Oswald wept and cried when he found out that little Patrick Kennedy was dead. That's how much he loved the Kennedys. And people don't know these things. You'll find out that the Warren Commission said they had no motive for him, except maybe he wanted fame. But if he wanted fame, why did he say, I'm a patsy, I didn't do it? And he couldn't say, I'm CIA, you don't do this to me. All his CIA contacts in the USSR, they would have killed them all. The Soviets would have killed them. Everybody associated with him after that man being accused of killing Kennedy. You see what I mean? And what else would have happened? His wife would have died. I would have died. We've all been dead. But he held his ground. He joined an abort team. And there's another thing. The abort team that I'm talking about, nobody knew about in 1999. Only one man, Jim Mars, had the courage to interview me when others said, we can't believe this woman. We can't believe this. Jim Mars says, I want to talk to you. He started looking at my evidence files. We're in a big restaurant, lots of noise. Now, if you want to meet anyone and you're a witness, you want to be, as I say, always be where there's a lot of noise and always change the meeting place at the last moment. Nobody's going to tape you. Nobody's going to know, and they won't be able to hear what you're saying. That's really important when you're getting new information out. Lee taught me many things on how to save myself and protect myself. That's why I'm still alive, one of the reasons. And being very noisy now is another way to stay alive. When you're really in the spotlight for weeks at a time, that's pretty safe. It's when you're not that you have to worry. But at any rate, here we're talking about Lee Oswald and what he was doing with Marina. And in 1999, when Jim Marrs hears that Lee told me that he had joined an abort team. Nobody knew that. Nobody. The only people who knew about that, there were only 2 or 3 at the time, because Tosh Plumley, that's Robert Tosh Plumley, CIA pilot, and by the way, he's still active. Just a couple of years ago, he testified before a congressional committee on drug dealings and the activities of the CIA, pushing drugs and the things that they do are abominable. And it'd be wonderful to see it cleaned up, But at any rate, here's Tosh Plumley. He had told Jim Marrs about the abort team that came in. They got there too late. Lee had told me, I knew nothing about this abort team. Nobody knew about it. Only Jim and a couple of people who never got in the news, never had been anywhere. So I'm sitting with Jim and I'm showing him all this evidence files. He's going like that. I have witnesses, okay. Then I said Lee had joined an abort team, and he, what? Like that. What? An abort team? Tell me about it. So I did. And that's why Jim Marrs, from the very beginning, has always stood by my side and said he believed me, because he knew nobody knew about this team before and how would I know about it? The others I like to bring up is called the Big Event. They're calling the operation now to kill Kennedy all over the news ever since 2013, the Big Event. But before that, in 1999, nobody was doing that. In 2003, when I was on the History Channel, and I'd been filmed about 28 hours, and they distilled it into 44 minutes. They took out witnesses. I was there by myself, just a talking head. But at that time, at least, one thing that didn't get taken out was that I said, Lee told me the big event was going to occur, on Friday. And he called it the Big Event. Now, there's a person I really love very much. I consider him like a son, and he calls me Mom. The name of the young man, I think you'll recognize, his name is St. John Hunt. Do you know who that is?
To someone from the E. Howard line?
Yes, St. John Hunt is the son of E. Howard Hunt, the Watergate burglar, and the man who came out with his confessions tapes when he thought he was going to die. He actually lived a couple more years. But on those tapes, he said that the operation to kill Kennedy was called the Big Event. It was called the Big Event. And that was several years after I had said that Lee called the operation the Big Event. So that's how close Lee got into this. That's how far he penetrated. A lot of people say, well, how could he have done that? And for those who don't know who David Ferrie is, David William Ferrie. By the way, my father's name was Donald William Very, and this was David William Ferrie. And I was Jay Very. And people that really helped me, because I was known as Jay Very, which sounds like Dave Ferrie if you hear it at a little bit of a distance. And that could be a male or female, the word, because he called me Jay. And then yet in our cover job, I was Mrs. Baker. And then when I was hiding back in Florida, I was Mrs. Robert Ellison Baker III, just about as far away as you could get from Jay Ferrie. And all those local homosexuals they were just like anyone else, good people in so many ways, but a lot of them were getting arrested, and some of them were pedophiles, and he was running with a group like that, and he was an embarrassment to the CIA and FBI, but they had used him early on. You see, they used to have voodoo, as you know, is still famous in New Orleans. A lot of the Cuban refugees that came, they brought in, and from Haiti and so on, they brought in all these strange drugs. The CIA was interested in mind-altering drugs in the 50s and into the 60s. And David Ferrie is one of those they contacted. Why would they do that? Well, you'll find that his name even in the telephone directory is Dr. David Ferry, psychologist. And he was working with Robert Heath over at Tulane and so on. Anyway, so we have these connections with David Ferry and CIA and MK Ultra, the mind control system, and the fact that they were interested. They thought Dave could help them find what was going on with voodoo, what was going on with these mind-altering drugs that they were using, in Haiti and so on, to produce zombies. What's going on? They soon went on all the way to Haiti, but they tried that first. So Dave knew about that project. He was into all kinds of things. He was very, very good in science. And he had a deep desire to learn how to do cancer research because his mom was dying of it. She was already dead by the time I got there. So Dave had this expertise. He knew Dr. Mary Sherman. When they were creating this ring of specialists, they didn't want them to communicate with each other. They broke the ring by using David Ferry for part of the thing so that you couldn't, Dave passing something on, it didn't go from one doctor to the other. It was broken. The ring was broken. And they set it all up in March of 1963. Alton Ochsner moved his huge laboratories and everything he had in truck after truck after truck, all the way over to Jefferson Parish, next door there to New Orleans, and started Ochsner Clinic on a huge, beautiful campus. That he had received the acreage there from Clint Murchison. You've got all these Texas millionaires who want to kill Kennedy. They're all have given him tons of money. And Murchison got the land from Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello and his brother, they all hate Kennedy, and they hate Bobby Kennedy the most. You've got all this going on right here in New Orleans. So I'm just saying, so you've got all this background going on. Now, David Ferry hated Kennedy. That's what everybody believed. He had been training. He was a wonderful pilot, knew 5 languages fluently, also Greek and Latin, and could even read some Russian himself, all kinds of wits and brains about him. And here he had been studying cancer research. He was actually doing a portion of the cancer work there that he was best suited for, working with Mary Sherman, this wonderful person I was working with. Alton Ochsner is over the whole thing. He's in the newspapers as anti-Castro, anti-communist, and he's flying every week to Washington, D.C. And Alton Ochsner is all over the place in Central and South America. He's everywhere where it's anti-Castro. You find his name, you find him. What's going on? He was training a lot of kids over there from Cuba. Castro cut that off. They couldn't become doctors under Ochsner anymore. They couldn't become famous. They were being sent to Russia instead to be trained. They hated it. They hated the fact they'd come back and they couldn't get rich as doctors. They were being sent out to take care of the peasants on a salary. So there was a lot of resentment. There were a lot of people interested in changing that and getting Castro out of that system so they could be rich. I want to be a plastic surgeon for actresses and actors over in Hollywood, and now I have to go out and fix a peasant's nose. See, it's like that. So this is the situation. Ochsner knew a lot of people who were medically, connected like he was, and he had many deep connections. And he knew that he could find ways to reach Castro with a biological weapon. Now, it might not be as close as doctors, but say you have to give Castro a penicillin shot. Because, by the way, they had dengue fever going on. You had all these, he's out often among all these different people. They want to keep him healthy. He's taking his DPT shots, everything. But what if you had cancer in that little bottle? Who would know? If a technician that didn't like him put that in there, you pull it out of the refrigerator, suck some of that up into a hypodermic needle, and this technician gives him a shot. The doctor doesn't give the shot. The tech does. Think about it. And the tech gives the shot maybe with a big bore needle that won't clog up, because cancer cells will clog a regular needle. So it's going to be a painful shot. All right, so I'm saying there are ways that we knew that we could reach Castro and hopefully kill him. Why would I care? I lived in Florida. I dated people who hated Castro. They told me how he tortured people. And here's David Ferry feeling the same way. David, I'm meeting him. He's brilliant. He's a Catholic. He's wanted to be a priest. He's a homosexual, and he felt like that ruined his life. But he knew that I wanted to become a nun, and now here I was, an atheist. And that really concerned him, you know. And so we had many talks. We got close for many reasons, most of them having to do with trying to save Kennedy's life. The man that everybody thought hated Kennedy's guts turned out to be the one man who was getting information to try to save his life. Why? During the Bay of Pigs, when David Ferrie, who had trained pilots and had done so much work with these anti-Castro insurgents, some of the kids he worked with at 17, 18, 19 years old, they were murdered by Castro, of course, during the Bay of Pigs operation. One of them, at least, was tortured in a terrible way. Tony Lopez Fresquet told me how some of Castro's men took a CIA agent, hung him up by the arms, and they used a blowtorch under his armpits to torture him. Now, when you hear things like that, you don't feel like it's a bad thing to kill him. You see, you have to see where we were coming from. I see these tanks rolling down, and this is 6 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Castro has aimed his nuclear weapons at my family and me, and everyone I love and care about. And they're saying, would you like to help kill him? Guess how I felt. Because I had all these horror stories, too. You know, this is a bad man. This is what I felt. And I trusted my elders. I trusted them and respected them. They felt the same way. What am I to think? So people who say, oh, you're a murderer and all that, you don't understand the times and what we were going through and the fear we had that we could all be annihilated by nuclear war. So here we are. I'm meeting David Ferrie, and I learned one important thing. Right in July 1961, during the Bay of Pigs operation and all that, David Ferrie was furious. And after that cooled down, there was a special meeting of retired military officers. They came from several states, Texas and Georgia, and mostly, though, of course, Louisiana, because it was located in New Orleans. Brand new organization, never had a meeting before. And who did they choose for their keynote speaker? A man who speaks so well, was so popular, so anti-communist, David Ferrie. So that's the gifted man we're talking about. So important and had so much information to give that this retired officers group, large, there must have been 150 people there. They want him to be their keynote speaker for their very first meeting. He gets up there, he's angry. He says, after a while, he talks about the Bay of Pigs, and he's red in the face. He's lost it. He knows that one of his boys that he had worked with, he was a good kid, was put in a metal container along with others, and they hauled it off, opened it up. They'd all been broiled to death under the hot sun inside that container. So then now he's saying, you know, Kennedy ought to be shot. Somebody's going to come from behind a bush and shoot that man. They made him get off the stage. But then, when the whole thing was over, about half of them, Dave said, came to him and said, look, do you know we feel the same way? We hate him too. Would you like to be with us? David Ferrie, from that time on, pretended that he hated Kennedy. Why? It was easy to feel that way for a long time, but then he learned the truth. He saw that Kennedy actually fired General Charles Cabell, who was in charge of all that. He disgraced him, got rid of him. And of course, everybody here should know that Charles Cabell's brother was Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas, where Kennedy was shot. The other thing that you ought to understand is when David Ferrie saw that Kennedy actually fired Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA all that time, that's when he really made enemies. Then David Ferrie realized that this man was not to blame for what happened at the Bay of Pigs. And here he was saying to everybody, I hate Kennedy. But this is an Irishman, just like Dave. They're Irish Catholics. He had voted for him. Now he has to keep it to himself that he really realizes Kennedy's in grave danger, and he is in among plotters, people who knew, stretched out between New Orleans all the way over to Dallas and everywhere else. And a lot of the military involved, CIA's involved. He's already involved in many ways with the CIA because of the MK Ultra program he was in and so on. David Ferrie is getting inside information from people who trust him about what's going to happen. And we have Dave telling me this, and I learned then how Lee loved Kennedy, and he changed my mind about Kennedy, because I learned all kinds of bad things about Kennedy through my anti-Castro friends in University of Florida. Lee Oswald taught me to respect and love President Kennedy, which I do to this day. So here we have the situation where Lee is getting information and he is able to find ways to try to save Kennedy's life. That's why I say he's a hero. I'm sorry I talked so long.
No, 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 no. Listen, this is vital. Now, um, Lee told you that, among others, there were three individuals who were key in the organization or key to making the assassination happen. One
Yes.
was David Atlee Phillips of the CIA, and the
Yes.
other two were aides or associates of Lyndon Johnson, Bobby
Yes,
Baker.
and it was because of them, not that they were involved, but
Yeah.
because of them, because Lyndon Johnson was about to go to prison.
Yeah. Bobby Baker and Billy Saul Estes.
Yes.
And in fact, the assassination was accelerated because Kennedy was going to drop Johnson from the ticket in 1964
Yes.
because of scandals associated with his aides.
Oddly, in 1999, when I tried to talk about all this, nobody was really on board. Now we have like the Devil's Chessboard. We have a lot of different books that have come out, about LBJ and his treachery. But even in 2003, when it was on the History Channel, it was banned after only 5 times. You couldn't mention Lyndon Johnson's name without getting blackballed. And of course, it hurt me. I lost my career and everything.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Barbara Garson,
Yes.
actually produced a play called Mac Bird, which
wow.
Took Macbeth and made LBJ, and really this was back then. But now, my question is about Jim Garrison, because I'm trying to understand Jim Garrison from your book, and now we understand Lee. Now we understand Dave Ferry. Now we understand Guy Bannister. I mean, these guys knew everything. These guys knew everything that happened in New Orleans. These guys knew it. When Jim Garrison, why is it that all of this didn't come out with Jim Garrison? Why is it that Jim Garrison didn't go after Billy Saul Estes, Bobby Baker, David Atlee Phillips?
Well, first of all, it's a matter of jurisdiction. The people he could go after that were in New Orleans, those are the ones that he could look at closest and had a reason to go. Then he could extend, couldn't he, to that if they would let him. As you know, the CIA jumped all over him and made it impossible for him to extend. He couldn't even. He tried to subpoena all kinds of people and extradite them, and they were all put down.
And every 50 subpoenas were dishonored from everywhere.
It's unprecedented, actually.
Yeah. You know that.
On top of that, he had a problem with even his own house. Everybody in New Orleans that was involved with money, even his own house, though, was financed by Carlos Marcello Associates. I mean, there are many places he couldn't go if he wanted to keep his family alive.
Yeah, you know that we had just gotten the House Select Committee on Assassinations started. And I had just become a futurist at Stanford Research Institute. This is in.
So you're a futurist. That's wonderful. So am I.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I have a book called Letters to the Cyborgs out.
Oh well, you'll have to come and talk to us about that book.
I'd love to.
Yeah, and so I had. We had just started a project with the Jimmy Carter White House, which was the 1977 Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study. And I was in Washington, and we had two projects going. One was the House Select Committee on Assassinations, because I was on the board of directors of the Assassination Information Bureau with Carl Oglesby and a bunch of people, and we and Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez had asked us to be kind of a public watchdog, and we had this house on DuPont Circle, kind of a safe house where we had all kind of people come in and, give us stuff, and we take it up to the committee and everything. And the second project that I had was at the White House, the House Select Committee on Assassinations that I was director of. So I was in Washington, and I just met with the Assistant Secretary of Defense of Carter. And I was going to go down to New Orleans to visit my brother, who was studying architecture at Tulane. So I called up.
That's wonderful. Look at how these things are meshing together.
Yeah,
like Tulane and all that.
So,
I mean, that's
yeah.
how I got in.
No. So I called up Jim Garrison's office, and I made an appointment with him. And I said, I'm going to be down in New Orleans this week. And he says, let's meet at the New Orleans Athletic Club on Sunday. Because I was going to get there Friday. And the King Tut exhibit was in town that day. So my brother and I went to the King Tut exhibit on Saturday. I get to the King Tut exhibit, and I walk inside the exhibit, and all of a sudden I get completely dizzy, and it's as though I had swallowed an ounce of LSD. And I start seeing all these things, and I swirl around, and somebody had given me
at
a
the Light
chemical
Club.
attack.
I mean, anything went there. I mean, they had stuff going on.
Yeah. And so I was disabled by some kind of bioweapon, so I could not meet with Garrison that Sunday because we had just started the House Select Committee on Assassinations, because I was going to invite him to come out. That was when we had just started it, and the CIA hadn't completely infiltrated it yet. See what I'm saying? That's how this thing has been a skirmish.
People, will say these things don't happen, but when you live through them, and by the way, I understand your position. You can't even report these things. Nobody believes you. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, they attack you with it. I mean, I was attacked with some kind of bioweapon, some kind of psychedelic or something, so that people would think that I'm nuts or something, because I was like swooning, everything became,
I'm so sorry.
They could have given me LSD or something.
They had an arsenal there in New Orleans. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but that was the day, that was a Saturday, and I was scheduled to meet with Jim Garrison at the New Orleans Athletic Club. And Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez tasked me with going out and getting people to bring them into the committee. And I was going down to New Orleans to bring Jim Garrison, especially to the committee. And that's what happened. Isn't that amazing? So I'm
not amazed so much as distressed.
Yeah, no, but I mean, now I understand, because you have introduced this to the living Dave Ferry, to the living Guy Bannister, and that scene where you become Marina Oswald. Now, first of all, who's doing the movie of this? This is
actually
movie.
It seems every time they try to start it, the movie, somebody moves in to stop it. We actually have screenplay and everything.
Oh, this is, I was reading, I said, this is the best movie. I mean, this is such an incredible movie. No, well, please go walk us through, because we're now, and things are getting pretty intense. I remember, let's say this is about June of 1963.
Well, we met in April. By June, we are totally in love. We're working for Cover Company.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, you want to hear about synchronicity? You want to hear some?
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. So Lee Oswald and I arrive in New Orleans the same week, within 7 days of each other, in other words. The next thing that happens, it's on the record, all right? Well, besides the fact that he moves into the YMCA first and I move into the YWCA, he will soon move in with his aunt and uncle, Murrett. And that's important, by the way, that Lee was there for a number of reasons, but one of them was that he was a bridge between the CIA and the Mafia when they're in their efforts to kill Castro. They have finally admitted they worked together. But Lee's uncle was close to Carlos Marcello, and Lee is also CIA, so he was a real good bridge between the two entities there in New Orleans. And he was doing a lot more than just watching over our project. He was involved in other. He was actually working with Guy Bannister in certain projects as well, and of course we have other witnesses now that tell us so. But to not diverge too far from the facts, Lee Oswald and I move into the same district. We are only blocks away from each other the same week. We're both in apartments. Neither of us have cars. Both of us have to ride a bus. When he gets on the magazine bus at 4907 Magazine Street, the next bus stop was at Marengo, and that's where I was, and I get on the bus stop. And the bus is mainly filled with black people. They're coming in to be maids and all. So you don't think he would notice in 11 weeks of that's on record. He traveled 11 weeks every day to work on the magazine bus, and there's this white girl that gets off at Riley right with him at the same time. Do you think we never met? Anybody with any brains in their head would see, of course, that you can't miss it, and that's for anybody who says that but we met, of course, earlier than that. Now, we both were hired the same day at a small subsidiary of Riley's. This company was called Standard. It's now quite big. It's as part of Riley. But then there were like 12 employees. We're there for a whole week, and our records are getting laundered while we're there. And I'm learning how to type faster because I have to pretend to be the secretary for the vice president of Riley. They had brought in a former FBI agent for this. Until then, Riley Company always had only their own followers and their own family, being president, vice president, and so on. But for about 2 years in there, they will have William Monahan. And Moynihan is a former FBI agent. He's running the things as vice president. He's in charge of me and Lee, for this part of the project. So Lee and I, for 1 week, are in this Standard company together, coffee company. Then the same day, it's on the record, we both moved to the main Riley company, That's on May 17th. So by now, we have all this going on. When Lee is fired, and the circumstances of the firing, a few days before he's supposed to really be fired with the green glass. At the time he's fired, we're now talking about July 19th. And July 20th, an ad comes out to replace me. Obviously, he was fired at 4:30. They put the ad in at 4:30. Next morning, it's in the paper that they want to replace the secretary. That's me. Of course, I was there putting my initials on his time cards because he wasn't around. And you can see the evidence of the time cards that he would check in at 9:30 or 8:35 or even 10 o'clock. I was checking him out like 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and so on. So his checking ins are all different kinds of times, and mine are right on the nose because I'm a scientist. And they finally said, look, you've got to put in like 5:31 or something because this is too precise, So on July 19th, he is fired. On July 20th, the ad comes out to replace me. What happens next? On August 9th, I'm still there. Why? Because when they put the ad in the paper for me, I was only there at minimum wage because that wasn't really my job. I mean, it was just a cover job. I was there part of the time, of course, and visible. But now nobody was going to be a vice president secretary for minimum wage, so they had to put the ad in twice. That's why it was still there. So August 9th, I am still at Riley's, even though they're trying to find somebody else. And I come down to see what Lee's doing because I am bringing a big stack of flyers. You may have wondered, remember, Carlos Quiroga came to Lee Oswald's apartment carrying a stack of Hands Off Cuba flyers. Nobody knows how he got them. Of course, in the book, you'll find out how he got them. So here I am bringing flyers back. And I am a scientist, and I noticed the flyers, Hands Off Cuba, there at the top, there's more margin there than at the bottom. So I cut the tops off to make them even. Some of those colorful pieces got people's attention over at Riley's. I didn't know it. I actually even crumpled up one of the FPCC flyers and threw it in the wastebasket. But I didn't know anybody would care. It's a great big wastebasket. Well, somebody did. So here I am, August 9th. I hand back these extra flyers to, he's famous now, his name is Andrews, and you'll see him, he was an attorney. And Dean Andrews, great big fat fellow with the sweatiest hands in the world, shakes my hand, takes these, and puts them in his briefcase. Later, why was that happening? Because if Lee had not set aside some of these flyers, and he had him. I gave them back to him at that time through Dean Andrews, who is in the film JFK. You can't miss him. Garrison has a confrontation with him. He knows that Andrews was asked to defend Lee Oswald when he was first arrested for the murder of J.D. Tippit, right on November 22nd. He knows all this going on. So Andrews knows who I am. He knows who Lee is. It's very interesting. Just a moment. And I hand this over to him, and these pamphlets were set aside because Carlos Brunier and the others come around and they start pushing on Lee, and they're stomping on his papers. He wouldn't have had any left. He'd have to print more, and they didn't want to do that. So those are the papers that eventually Dean Andrews gives back to Carlos Quiroga, who takes them back to Lee so he can have them for the next demonstration. He didn't have to go and print more.
Right.
Why I'm talking about this, August 9th, I'm there. I was seen with Lee during that period of time when he was arrested. So my last check with Riley's, the coffee company there, is for August 9th, the same day Lee is arrested. So that's another so-called coincidence. The day that he's arrested is it shows my severance paycheck from Riley, August 9th, like that. What happens next? We see that Lee Oswald leaves New Orleans in September, and so do I, never to return. So these are just some of the coincidences that are on the, that you can see on the outside going on.
Right.
That's just the beginning. To say nothing about some of the other things that we had in common, anyway.
Right.
So you're so intelligent. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I know you have more questions.
Yeah, I do. When, in what month did Lee tell you I'd become involved in this plot to assassinate Kennedy?
All right. Well, the roots of it started when he went to Spring Hill, and that was you'll find that he was arrested. He was terminated from Riley's on July 19th, and so that was a Friday. By that next Friday, he is speaking in Mobile, Alabama, before a group of what Warren Commission calls boys, but they were graduate seminarians, priests, Jesuits, and highly intelligent college grads. And they had brought in Lee Oswald to talk to them about life in the Soviet Union. That's the ostensible reason for this talk, which the Warren Commission, they said lasted half an hour, I think McMillan said, which was not true. It lasted about a little more than an hour and 20 minutes altogether. Lee told me that he had about an hour that he spoke about 20 minutes of questions, but there was more to it than that. Bobby Kennedy sent down, he's a famous priest, and we can look him up, he's a Jesuit. He came out with, in his memoirs, that he had been the confidant of Jackie Kennedy, and that she had, after Kennedy died, she wanted to kill herself. So you can look up this priest, it's the same one, that came to the seminar down here in Mobile, Alabama at Spring Hill. Now, the reason the Jesuits were there was not necessarily just to learn about life in the Soviet Union. Lee was actually there to help them make up their minds whether or not they would pursue Marxist teachings and their philosophies, because they saw Jesus as a Marxist. And, Marxism itself is not so bad. It's how it's used that turns it all bad. I mean, it's nice to give everything you have to others. Give to the poor, remember Jesus said, and follow me, give everything you have away. And rely on each other and trust in God. Okay, anyway, you have a lot of Jesuits who thought maybe we ought to go ahead and support Castro. Maybe we ought to go ahead and, pursue Marxist policies and get along with Castro. Even if it all turns communist, we'll have influence through the Catholic Church. This at a time when Castro is casting out nuns and bishops and everybody, the Catholics are all being kicked out of Cuba. Now, I want to show you an inside piece of information that shows how Lee and I were in love. Lee makes an application on this Mexican visa tourist application to go to Mexico City, and I'm supposed to meet him there, as you know from the book. But there you'll see that he put that down, that he was a Catholic. Now, the last thing you want to do if you're a spy and you want to go and enter Cuba is to put that you're a Catholic down on your religion part, see? But he did that because we wanted to get married. We're not in a civil organization, but I was raised Catholic, as you can tell. I had and he wanted wanted to have some kind of document. And if we went deep into Mexico somewhere where they're ignorant, they see it says Catholic and they can't read the rest of it, it looks like he's a Catholic. It didn't matter what the document was about. It just looks very official. So he had a copy of his application saying that he was a Catholic, and he was going to use that for his evidence. People are saying, well, why did he put Catholic? We did it for us so we could get married. This is why also we have, we see that the FBI has gone down to Laredo, Texas, and what are they doing? They're looking through all the bus lockers. They're looking through all the banks. They have 2 banks there, and the Social Security, they have these boxes there that, that you can, to hold personal items and so on, and they have gone through all of them. They're looking for Lee Oswald's materials and stuff, and I think they found them. Lee Oswald, when he was giving his talk in New Orleans, he was dressed in a nice suit. They have, film of him, photographs. He's wearing a nice suit. That suit is not in his possessions. Why am I mentioning that? Lee actually left a lot of materials and clothing, his nice things, in Laredo. And he had a safety deposit box in Laredo, and I believe they found all of his stuff there. They don't tell us. But why would they go to Laredo? Well, I know why, because we were going to get married, and he put all his things there. They told him, look, right before Christmas or right after Christmas, you can return to Mexico. So Lee left a lot of his good stuff there and didn't take it all the way back to Dallas when they ordered him back to Dallas after Mexico City. Now, there's another thing that shows you how easygoing Lee was in his sense of humor, but how no matter what he was doing, that the CIA was approving it. We have Lee Oswald. He has a passport. This passport's very interesting. The one he had when he entered the embassy in the United States Embassy in Moscow. He throws the passport down. He knows it's bugged everywhere. He cries out, I am renouncing my American citizenship, and I'm going to tell the Soviets everything I know. First of all, he would have been arrested if this were all true that he was going to. He did do that, but he was supposed to. Secondly, he comes back after 30 months, picks up his passport. They give him a State Department loan to come home on. In fine print, it says only a citizen in good standing can get this loan. Go look it up. You'll see he got the loan for him and his wife and child. He wasn't going to leave them behind. Quite different from others who left their sweethearts behind. They couldn't get them out. Couldn't. Had to leave them back. Not Lee. But Lee comes to the United States, and then here it is. We're looking at he knows he needs a new passport because his old one is covered with stamps saying USSR. That's not so good. So he wants a new passport. So what does he do on June 24th? He goes and tells me he's going to get a new passport. On June 25th, he gets it. And I'm there to meet the man who expedited it, shook his hand, everything. And by the way, his family's a witness. What's important about this passport? So easy was it for Lee to get this in just 24 hours that where it says his wife, and when did he marry his wife? You know what it says for the date on it? That he married Marina Oswald. He married her on April 31st, 1961. Now it's sinking in.
I mean, that
date doesn't exist.
Yeah. That's
but he was able to put that on his passport and get it approved in 24 hours because he could put it with Santa Claus and they would have approved it. See?
Right.
So there are many, many things that people have missed over all these years, but because I was with him, I know what to look for. All these years, not one soul ever mentioned that until I mentioned it last year. Started mentioning it.
Now, in our study of false flags, 9/11, let's say in our study of the Martin Luther King assassination, where they set up an individual to take the blame, who actually got away. Here, there are always these kind of interlocking themes.
Well, they also use the same things. So if something works, they use it again. That's going on.
Yeah.
And they always have Plan B.
Yeah.
They always have a backup plan that's not quite as good, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Could it be? I'm just talking here. Could it be
Yeah.
that the whole Castro,
Scenario.
Mexico cancer bioweapon was just a loop
I just love
to
it because
keep
I think you're right.
everybody busy, keep the left hand busy and occupied. And then right as you converge, right as the assassination comes up, because Lee says in the book, I'm getting into, I can't leave. He says,
He's in too
what
deep. Yeah.
he says, if I leave, it's just one more bullet for Kennedy, da da da, and then as you get closer to the event, he's folded into the event.
Yes, he
But
is.
that the plan all along was to offer
Well,
up Lee
I don't
Harvey
think
Oswald.
we know they had Val Lee, for example, up in Chicago. They had several. I think they focused more and more on him, but they were working on several others in other cities
Right.
too, and he was just one of them. He might have escaped, and I think he knew enough to know that he might have escaped, but he dared to send out a telex on Sunday, and he told me about the telex, and I told people that yes, that was he. It was not Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover does not misspell assassination, but a man with dyslexia will. Assassinate is not assassinate, and there are many other misspelled words in this telex, supposedly from the director himself. No, Lee knew to put it from the director, and he didn't send it to everywhere. That's why it didn't disappear from everywhere. He knew some of the numbers. When we were over at Guy Bannister's office, I saw with my own eyes. By the way, I was over there more than once. But the point is, there's a telex that Bannister had his own telex, and some of the other places did at the time too, and with the ticker tape and all that kind of thing. And there on the wall were the actual numbers to the FBI. I'm talking about Hoover's, the telex numbers, their special numbers. And the one to New Orleans and the one to the SAC in New Orleans, that is right there, the Special Agents in Command for FBI, and then also over in Dallas and so on, all the areas. It would be easy for Lee to memorize those particular numbers. And that's why we see some telex showing up in New Orleans when Lee is in Dallas. And Lee told me he sent a telex to try to save Kennedy's life. He said it put him under suspicion. He didn't think he was going to make it out alive. And sometimes I just wish if only we had tried to figure out a way to get out of this. But we were really trapped. They were good. They were good. They trapped us.
Yeah. He had enough foresight, though, to say, you have to go forward.
Yeah.
And he knew somehow, I think, that you would go forward and you would tell the world this story.
I had to survive. I had to survive.
I really feel that, though. I really feel that he said, go out and have babies.
Yeah.
But I think that this book is You're in His Baby. That this is how you tell the world. Because this is the hidden story. This is the hidden story of the John Kennedy assassination.
And the irony and the evil, there's so much evil. I mean, the man who's trying to save his life is the one that's accused of killing him. Of course, they have to shoot him right away so that he can't tell anyone.
Now, have you been approached by white hats?
Everybody has, haven't they?
Who say, look, we really want to make this right.
I think sometimes
we
I've
really
been
want to take your testimony and we want to turn your testimony into some kind of legal writ that will, along with the testimony of other living eyewitnesses, make this thing go forward, and so that
what's really happened is
we'll
they've done
finally
things
have
like
justice.
I've been threatened with arrest, because I participated knowingly in the murder of the prisoners out there at the Jackson Mental Hospital and things like that. That I knew about a biological weapon that was developed and didn't say anything, as if anybody believed me. But we have all this going on now. Think about what we have today. When anybody says, "Do we have a biological weapon now in cancer?"
No, but you're protected under whistleblower acts, I believe.
Oh yeah, like Snowden. If he comes back to the United States, they want to execute him. That's the kind of protection. Now there's an awful lot, and I wish I could say I really still can't. But if anything happens to me, it will come out. They'll be sorry. That's what you have to do things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And so are you hopeful that there will be a legal
All right, let me ask you a question. This is serious. What did anyone ever wonder why all of Europe and everywhere else, all you heard was evil about Donald Trump? You heard nothing but evil about him. Yet Trump is the one who brought forth. He said that Rafael Cruz was there in New Orleans, helping Lee Oswald. I'm a witness that that's true. And I'm a witness that people close to Donald Trump know the truth about the Kennedy assassination. And I feel much more safe today than I did even a week ago because of it. And for those who wonder about Rafael Cruz, you'll see that Rafael Cruz's son, Ted Cruz, as soon as Donald Trump brought out about Ted Cruz, that his father was associated with Lee Oswald, Ted Cruz left he resigned. He stopped being a contender for the position of President of the United States. He dropped out at once. Now, a few days later, he finally got his ducks in a row. He said, "Oh no, nothing happened." No, he dropped out for good reason. Yes, Rafael Cruz was there. No, Rafael Cruz is not a bad man. See, here's the media's problem. If they say that was Rafael Cruz with Lee Oswald, helping Lee Oswald, now I'll go into how he helped him in a minute, then how can they say that Lee Oswald killed Kennedy if Lee Oswald was working for the right people for the CIA, which he was? When I talked about the fact that Lee Oswald is handing out those pamphlets and things on August 9th, remember I said he had to save some, and he saved those extra flyers for the week following. The next Friday, he was out there doing it again, this time at the Trade Mart. But because of the first time when he was arrested on August 9th, I was there. It was terrifying. You'll see there's even a film that shows Lee is not just with these three fellows that he had selected. Early in the book, I show how Lee decided to get three men to beat him up, sort of, hit him and cause trouble. And he used that newspaper article and set up in August 9th to have these three guys come to accost him and get him arrested. Maybe that was fine. It would prove he's pro-Castro. That's the kind of courage. Lee said, "I don't care if they pop me in the nose. That's okay." He was like that. So here we have Lee now in August 9th. He's surrounded. David Ferrie actually started an anti-Castro demonstration down the street to try and get the anti-Castro people there so they wouldn't hurt Lee. Nevertheless, there were so many people there on Canal Street, and Lee was surrounded by these, and they're mad, they're angry, they're Cubans. They're going to beat the tar out of him. I was really worried about Lee, and the police came just in time. And as you know in the book, it says, I even went to a policeman and said, "Please get over there." Because I was worried that they would beat him up really badly before the police could arrest him. So this is what happened next. A week later, Lee has transferred not to Canal Street anymore. He's at the Trade Mart where there's not as much traffic. Still wants to hand out these flyers, and of course he's doing this to help try and pick out some of the spies, because an ordinary person, they'll read it and say, "Ugh, this is pro-Castro stuff," and throw it away. But someone interested in Castro would keep it, or they at least fold it up and put it in their pocket. Then you want to watch them, and that's what that was about. Very important. They never held a meeting. There was never a lecture. It's just following the people who were interested in these flyers, and they did manage to say to arrest real spies from that. But here's Lee passing these out, and of course it legitimizes Lee as pro-Castro, which he needs to do. If he's going to carry a biological weapon to hand off in Mexico City, he better not look anti-Castro. So that's why all that's going on. At the same time, Lee realizes by posing as pro-Castro, he can be used as a patsy. He knows this. He knows how CIA can double on their agents and put them in bad spots sometimes. And he said to me, "They're not letting me advance in the company." That really worried him, as you saw in the book. They're not letting me advance in the company because Jesus doesn't trust me. And that was James Jesus Angleton he's talking about. Jesus didn't trust me because I didn't come back in a coffin. See? Now, Lee had been trained for all those people out there say, oh, maybe he was a mind controlled, someone. Maybe he's being mind controlled. No, he was selected especially because he could resist that kind of thing. He had a will of steel, a will of iron. It's really important to understand that when he was at Sugi, he understood about those programs. They trained him, and it's on record. He told the police something very interesting. He said, I'm used to harsh, strong interrogations. He said, hard ones and soft ones. He had been trained to resist because of Korean War. We knew about brainwashing, and when ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, trained Lee Oswald to resist all kinds of brainwashing and everything, they knew they could trust him to go in. That's one reason when he came back, they didn't arrest him or anything. He was debriefed in New York, by the way. All right, anyway, to make a long story short, we now have him, he's passing out flyers, but he's got a concern. He doesn't want anybody coming up from behind him, like hitting him on the head. He's got Rafael Cruz standing there on film. He's standing there with flyers in his hand. He's not passing any of them out. He's not passing any of them out. All around Rafael, other people are walking around, and there's one other person who's helping Lee Oswald pass out these flyers. We're not concerned about Mr. Steele, Charles Steele. He was just an FBI informant, and he could have been by random picked out. That's not what's important. What's important is Rafael Cruz was brought in there for two reasons. One, he could hear all the different Spanish going on, and he'd know if any crowd gathered, he'd know what they were saying and whether it was time to help defend Lee or divert them. The other thing that we know that, and Lee told me, I don't remember faces very well. I can tell how many windows are in a building, passing it by. It's awful that way. I have a lot of detailed memory. But faces sometimes get to me, and you'll see that Lee and I were walking along, and I didn't even recognize Carlos Marcello. And they got upset about it. All I could see was Lee, and they came back and said, didn't you see him? And I said, well, and Lee said, this is the girl that can't, she just gets lost going around the corner. They said, oh, it's her. You mean the one that can't find her way out of a paper bag? And they started laughing at me. They said, we don't have to worry about her. She can't remember what anybody looks like. Well, that helped me, I'm sure. But anyway, I did want to remember this face because Lee told me this. He said, don't worry about me. I'm going to have somebody out there watching my back. And he's my angel. Well, then, so when I came to said, remember, I wanted to see what was going on. And by now, I'm not working at Riley, so I can. And I'm worried about him. I don't want him to get hurt, so I want to see what's going on. And there he's passing this out, and I come close to him before they start passing all this out, just before the cameras and everything get there. These kind of cameras that hang around their necks, you can see them coming. My dad used to have, wish he had those kind of cameras when he had his TV station. So I go up to him, and he says, you can't stay there. They're coming. I can see him coming. He said, but there he is. And not 6 feet from me, here is Rafael Cruz. Sloped shoulders, his shoulders, they're just, you can't, with a shovel, you can't knock people's shoulders down as flat as his are. They're just sloped just like that. You can't miss it. They're still that way today. And everything about him, it was him. And Lee said, that is Raffaello. I guess Raffaello is a pet name for Raphael. Because later, okay, so anyway, so he's there. Now, one reason I'm really pleased to say that I believe Chauncey Holt is telling the truth. This is the man who claimed to be the third tramp. This is the man who claimed to be, at the Trade Mart. He said he was leaving the Trade Mart at that time, and he mentions that he was sent there to be there around that time in case Lee Oswald needed some support, some help. So when I read that, I knew that Chauncey Holt had to know about Lee's situation. Because there you have Chauncey Holt in his book, which he wrote before he knew about me. He wrote that before he died just a few weeks after he made his last film, long before a lot of this material came out, that he was there and he was going to watch Lee Oswald's back if necessary. So Chauncey Holt is saying it, and here is Rafael Cruz, who's been brought in to, because he knows his Spanish fluently, he can tell what's going on. Now, what's the upshot of all this? Rafael Cruz, later, Lee and I are walking along, we're going to Charlie's restaurant. By the way, a new file has come out showing that there was a deaf mute there who saw Lee Oswald there with a girl all the time at Charlie's restaurant at 640 Carondelet. That's important because we were working at 640 Riley's. And 640 Carondelet, I wouldn't get lost. Remember I said I get lost going around the corner? Well, Charlie's restaurant is at 640 Carondelet, just a straight walk. And we would go there around 5 and 5:30 because, as you read in the book, we didn't want to go home right away after work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a chance to see each other. So we
Right.
trained everybody to expect us home later. That meant we spent time before we got on a bus. We had to spend it somewhere. And it was between like 5 and 5:30 before we actually took the magazine bus all the way down to Audubon Park where we could spend more time and then come up and he'd get off first and I get off next. You never know. There were no Riley employees seeing us that way.
Right.
All right. Well, the reason this is important is that later we're walking along toward Charlie's, and again, this deaf mute saw us, and he says he was always there between 5 and 5:30 and saw Lee with a girl there. Well, that was me, and that record recently just came out, so I'm really happy to talk about it. So here, Lee and I are walking along. We're going to go to Charlie's, and who do we see? There's Raphael Cruz walking across, going to go to Bannister's, right across us. Didn't see us, but Lee says to me, "There's my archangel, Raphael the archangel." So that was Raphael Cruz. Yes, sir, it was.
Amazing. And so now you're providing the context for, and you're actually
And
giving
it had nothing to
safety.
do with assassinating Kennedy or anything like that.
Right.
That's why I say Trump heard about this. He has a good friend who heard the whole thing, the whole story.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. So, where do you think all of this is going to eventuate? Are you hopeful that in our lifetimes we're going to have a revelation? We're going to have a public. There'll be like a truth and
Epiphany.
reconciliation of the John F. Kennedy assassination,
This is
and
happening.
there'll
It's
be an
happening.
honoring of Lee Harvey Oswald.
It's happening despite everything. It took how many years before Galileo recently was absolved by the Catholic Church from being a heretic because he said that the Earth was going around the sun instead of the other way around? You know what I'm saying? So the U.S. government may never officially admit to this. And they're going to say they're bringing out all these records next year. By the way, that's the 100th birthday of John F. Kennedy. Now, as you know, we're having a conference every year. Imagine what next year's is going to be like. And this conference has grown, and that is the key. People of all ages, and a lot of them are young. And when I first spoke out in 1999, I couldn't get anybody to listen to me. It's been 16 years, and all of a sudden, everywhere I go, oh, it's so glad to meet you and all that. And it's the young. They have had their eyes opened anyway because of so many other lies. They don't trust the media anymore. They understand now that the official version of things, and just because somebody says, oh, horrible conspiracy theory, they have created such an onus around the words conspiracy and theory, both very good English words that very well describe what happens all the time. Conspiracy is a fact of life. Only in America are we supposed to say that John F. Kennedy was not killed by anybody but by some lone nut. The lone nut that I loved and knew, that tried to save his life, that loved John F. Kennedy, loved him, and told me, what am I to do? I gave an oath as a Marine. And by the way, he joined the Marines when he was 17, this so-called communist. As soon as he could, said, I made an oath to protect my president and to obey my president. He said, how can I obey a dead president? This man deserves so much more, and it's coming out. I hope to live to see it, but I don't care. My conscience, I used to have nightmares. I had to hold this inside. I saw a nightmare where I'd see Lee up on a big Ferris wheel. Maybe that's because of David Ferry somewhere in my mind, but that Ferris wheel going up. And they were shooting at him, and I could see him fall out of the Ferris wheel all the way to the ground, and his skull split open, and this red light came out of the skull, and it was so horrible. I'd wake up screaming. After speaking out, I don't have that anymore. Not only that, I had a dream where Lee came to me and kissed me. For me, the life itself.
That is beautiful.
I'll love him forever.
That is beautiful. How can those of us how can our viewing audience, how can they support your work? how can they
Well, if they get
make
the book Me
this
and Lee,
happen?
and I'm telling you, if they do this
Yeah,
and share the book with others and get the, because the book is eternal. I mean, there's no timestamp on that book. But the other thing is that by getting the truth out, eventually, it's going to overwhelm the legend that was created by the government. But more than that, love is stronger than hate. Love conquers everything, and I'm counting on the power of love to reach people that they will see. You know, okay, we only knew each other April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. That was it. But it's been enough to last my life. I was loved. I was loved unconditionally, and I'm not going to let him down.
uh, how can people get in touch with you? Do you want people to
Of course, it's
communicate with
easy.
you?
Join me on Facebook at Judith Baker, Judyth Baker, and the most lovely people are there. We don't allow cursing and bad words in there. I mean, I'm kind of puritanical that way, but we have a lot of dignity there, and as long as you have freedom to believe what you want, but you know, as long as you don't batter others and so on. And I don't accept everybody. That's why I only have like 3,000 Facebook friends, but they're, I don't know, something like that. The point is that we know each other and we try to help each other. And it also give a lot of cancer research, cancer advice, helping people because I wanted to cure cancer. Yeah, I would do anything if somebody could get me back in the lab. I still could do it. I could still work in a good way toward curing cancer if I could just get in a lab. Do I look dowdy? I mean, you know.
You
So
know,
I'm just saying, I've kept up with it all. But how can people reach our? You can go to Judith Vary Baker, that's Judyth, Vary, Vary, Baker, at gmail.com. And I can, and by getting autograph books from me, all the money I get, I don't keep this money, and I can't be bought. And I've turned down. You know how rich I'd be if all I had to say is Lee Oswald killed Kennedy, because I've got all these witnesses, I've got all these documents I kept. But instead, I'm not. There are things like I need an eye operation, so I can't see very well. I've had a lot of radiation exposure, so you know, there are problems I have. But those don't bother me so much as the fact that the government's trying to say it doesn't matter anymore because it matters dearly. This is the blueprint as to how to fool the people. They've been using it ever since. You can see it right there in the book, Me and Lee. You can see the blueprint of how they can fool, manipulate, and make everything, and especially by judging people right away. By putting out there that the same day that Kennedy was shot, J. Edgar Hoover got this memo from the FBI agents there, right there in Dallas, saying, look, we have there's an ad in the paper, it has black around it. It's actually, you know what this is an obituary. And then we've got wanted for treason posters all over. Shouldn't we go after these people, see if they were involved? The rifle and all that evidence had not even reached the FBI laboratories. It was the same day that Kennedy was shot, and J. Edgar Hoover said, no, we have our man. You don't have to look any further. That's when you know you have a conspiracy. And that's what we had.
right.
All he asked me to do, he didn't ask much of me. He asked me to have babies. He asked me, please tell my little girls that I was a good guy. That's all he asked. And that book is dedicated to Marina, who's gone through hell, and her daughters. That book is dedicated to them for all they've had to go through. They really should give them compensation. They should give a pardon to Lee Oswald. That's what Obama should do, President Obama. Lee Oswald deserves a pardon, and he deserves to be placed in the right place in history as a man who gave his life trying to save the president. The most cruel and strange and obscene thing is that the man that tried to do all this for him is called the worst and ugliest man in history for killing Kennedy. You turn it around, you make the lie so big that it has to be believed.
Well, I know that I and many honor you and support you in
Just
your
pray for me too.
yeah,
Okay.
and and pray for you and join you in your work to
Thank you.
bring your truth and to make it, because it is the eternal truth, the truth of the matter, and the truth will out. So thank you for what you're doing.
And thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled. We would love to have you as a speaker at our JFK conference. That's being held, it will be held in Dallas again. We couldn't believe it. We've sold out way ahead of time. And we've asked the fire marshal to let us bring in more chairs. We have people, begging for tickets. We had no idea. It's just growing and growing.
You know,
I'm so grateful for everybody.
I,
We need to
I
have you speak.
yeah, I would be honored to speak there, and uh, I have gone there, and I've been at Dealey Plaza, and I've walked there many times,
Officially.
and every time that I go there, it's just this feeling which is just electric.
Well, if people want to meet me, here's something else that's happened. There's a group called Lancer out there, but they won't let me speak at their conference.
Hey,
But
sorry.
they're having the curator, the sixth floor museum is speaking at their conference. Okay, just to give you an idea where they're coming from, although they say they're on our side.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is that they're holding on Sunday, next Sunday, the memorial service for Kennedy with a moment of silence. They're holding this because it's convenient to their conference. But what we're doing, and we could really use more support, all we can get, we want to bring people in on November 22nd. Yes, I don't care if it is close to Thanksgiving, and 2 years from now it will be on Thanksgiving, but November 22nd is when Kennedy was killed. And traditionally, the moment of silence should be held at that time, from noon. We're holding it from noon to 1:30. We're going to do this for the rest until I'm dead. We're going to do it at least, and I hope beyond that. We're not going to let it happen on Sundays or Saturdays that are convenient to conferences. We're going to be out there on the day it happened and give Kennedy his honor and his due. One of the things they're doing is assassinating Kennedy again. What they're doing is putting out everything they can think of that is evil, rotten, and bad about this man that they can find, so that you don't care when you find out the government killed him. The government used many sources, and they're under many layers, but that's the bottom line. And they want Kennedy not to be, so they say, who cares? Kennedy was no good anyway. They try and say, for example, that he didn't do anything that's special. Oh, yes, he did. He saved us from World War III during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The other thing he did, a lot of people don't know that he is the author of the real Civil Rights Bill, and that Lyndon Johnson voted against for years of those kind of bills. And when he came into power, he knew he could get the sympathy of the Kennedy people and the blacks by pushing through Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill, and he took all the credit. And that's the way Lyndon Johnson was.
Right.
So I'm just saying to everybody, come out on November 22nd to Dealey Plaza. I will be there. I will shake your hand. I will hand you a pamphlet that shows the best books. It's not going to show Gerald Posner's Case Closed. It's going to show you the good books like The Devil's Chessboard. And I have a book, David Ferry, out there. It's the only book about David. But it's kind of intellectual, that one is. It's not fun reading. But the point is that the truth is out there. Come to Dealey Plaza at noon to 1:30 on the 22nd. Every year we'll be there, and you'll get good information. You don't have to go to a conference. It'll be
Good.
free.
And we'll have all of the links to your to the conference, to your
Thank you.
book, and everything in the video description to
Thank
this
you so much. Well,
interview.
this year it's jfkconference.com.
Right.
Next year, because we're growing, it's going to be jfkconferences.com.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so
So,
much, and I look forward to in the future to hope that you can join us again and
okay.
to take us more in depth in this, and also we'd love to have you talk about some of your other books.
Well, thank you, because we're facing some dire situations right now because of the lack of ethics. And when everything's profit driven, the consequences for the human race are not good. In fact, I hate to say that I don't like to sound like a pessimist, but we're headed on a fast track to hell the way we're going. And this is tiny little envelope of air that covers this planet is getting filthy. and we're using our atmosphere for our toilet. And there's so many things we're doing that where are we going to go? What are we going to do when the last place, everywhere where human beings have put themselves on an island where they're isolated, that island gets devoid of trees. I'm thinking of like Easter Island. Look what happened there. And they actually cut down the last tree that was there. Not a single, and then they all died. When we kill the last fish, the Indians say, you kill the last fish, cut down the last tree, you can't eat the money. God bless you, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much. Thank you.